Imagine growing up in a cult where your dad believes he is the second coming of Christ. Imagine the abuse, the religious trauma that would come along with something like that. And then imagine for a moment that you seek answers, you seek healing in the New Age movement and psychedelics and the occult, only to find that all along, the only answer that is truly going to satisfy your soul is found in the person of Jesus Christ, but the real Jesus, the Jesus of the Bible. Well, today's guest, Noelle, shares about her experience of that. She was raised in a cult. She has an incredible story with a lot of twists and turns, but a very happy ending. She finds Jesus, the Jesus who warns us in the Bible, when he says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." Enjoy the podcast. Noelle, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and being willing to share your testimony. We've had this in the works for a little while now, and I've been really looking forward to it. The first question I like to ask everyone, but I think it's particularly relevant in your case, is a little bit about your childhood. So maybe you could tell us about your childhood. It's a bit different compared to a lot of people's. When did you kind of realize that was the case? What was your early life like?
Thank you. Yeah, my upbringing is definitely an odd one. It wasn't until later on that I really realized the full extent of that. But basically, my father believed that he was the reincarnation of Jesus and the second coming. So, I was his firstborn, and I was wrapped up in that, in his story of this. So he named me legally Jesus, so Jesus, and believed that I was this female side of the reincarnation. And with that, he had beliefs that he had healing powers, that someday the world would know who he was, basically. So narcissism on steroids, grandiose delusions. He He was basically like a unsuccessful cult leader. I mean, he had like a small following, but he didn't really have the skills, I guess, to make it big. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. He had some kind of healing ministry. Some people said that he healed a blind man, like miracles would happen. Some of these things have been validated from other family members, but I don't really know. There was He would, I guess, like sell weed to kind of make more of a living, I guess. He saw it more as medicine, and he was wrapped up in Hell's Angels crowd, that gang in California, and yeah, there's a lot more to it, but I guess I'll just start with that.
And what was your experience of that like as a child? Like when you were growing up, did you feel like how did you think about your dad as a young person? Like, did you believe his own delusions when you were younger? And then did you kind of grow up and did your mind change? Or were you, yeah, what were your early memories like? I'm really curious about what your experience was like as a child with a father who had, I don't know if it was mental illness or spiritual. Maybe we can get into that. But
Mm.
yeah, what was it like for you as a young person growing up in that environment?
Yeah, so basically up until the age of 7, I was under the care of my parents, and it was just a nightmare. And then at the age of 7, my brother and I were abandoned at school, and we just never got picked up and immediately got shipped up off to foster care and started living with relatives. So my first 7 years of life were very different compared to after that. So by the time, but that for those first 7 years, my dad was doing his ministry. It was chaos and craziness, drugs, and he was abusive. He My mom tried to get away once and then twice she succeeded in that. We ended up moving up into the mountains in California, and this is where he was growing marijuana. So I grew up around that. I grew up like watering the plants and you know, all that type of thing. But he would go on like these 40-day sabbaticals. And one time my mom just said, don't come back. So he was in and out of the picture. The weird thing is that, like, I think I would probably relate to like the daddy's girl type of thing. Um, because I didn't know any better. Like, but I was like the golden child to him. And, what kid doesn't like that? And then he's gone. So there was like all that instability. And at some point around this time, um, my mom got addicted to meth, right? Up in these mountains, a lot of meth use. And we became homeless. We, I remember squatting in some like half burnt down house in the woods. And I mean, just crazy stuff like sleeping on wooden floors with just like a blanket, and it's like pitch darkness, like it's completely black, and like a bat flew into my hair, like just weird crazy stuff. We drank out of the creek nearby. um we were around really bad people, like there was witches around us, and um, murders and pedophiles. Like it was a nasty, evil place. And yeah, and then at some point we got into foster care. So yeah, that was the first chunk.
So you said when you were like 7, you moved in with relatives. So with when that period when you experienced homelessness and your mother was on drugs, was that before you were 7 or did that happen after you'd lived with your relatives?
No, that was all before. So I wasn't going to school consistently until I was 7. So I think it's kind of a miracle that I ever did well in school, and um, can even like that I'm in the counseling field and like holding eye contact. Right, there's stages of critical development from birth to 7, and like, so it's just kind of, I can't believe, even though it was a nightmare what I went through, I still kind of feel like, God was watching the situation, and there was still a lot of blessings with that. But yeah, so after the age of 7, I got taken in by my father's parents, which, as you can probably imagine, wasn't great because they were the parent of this abusive cultish guy. They were super, super controlling and rigid, and um, it was just complete culture shock to go from living in the woods to living in this like sterile, almost like straitjacket environment. And that's when I was also introduced to the Catholic Church. So those were there's a lot of layers between like my dad thinking he's Jesus. I'm like, and then being introduced to the Catholic Church in a horrible environment. I don't like that, right? And so it kept happening in my life.
And when you were living with his parents, were they on board with his delusions? Like, what kind of worldview were they fostering in you? Were they telling you that, your dad has like maybe a mental health issue, or were they supporting his kind of, what would you say, like his vision of who he is? What was life like for you there? How was your worldview being formed when you were living with his parents?
So when I was living with them, I didn't live for them for a very long time, like 8 months. It wasn't really talked about. Like that was kind of the theme in my on both sides of my family was denial, and we just don't talk about things. And later on, I would become the black sheep of my family because I was like, this isn't okay, and like I have all these issues, and I we need to heal. And that wasn't very accepted by my family. But I do remember when my mom sat me down after she got custody back, and we had to go to his place, my dad's place on the weekend, which was horrible. But she sat us down and was like, your father's been diagnosed with grandiose delusional disorder. And like, this is what that means. And he's so kind of framing it like he's ill, right? But on my dad's side, there was no discussion about that. His mother went along with a lot of this healing stuff, but some of his other family did not.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like it was a pretty unhealthy environment, even when you were in the care of other people. If you're not being counseled, like you would think, if one of my children went off the rails and that happened with them, and I had their grandchild come into care, one of the things I'd want to do is get them counseling, talk about it, figure this out, because that must have been just so wild for you as a young person, because your parents are everything when you're a young person. You learn from them, you copy their behaviors, which is another interesting thing you said. It's remarkable that you've turned out to be, somebody that's got an education, that's completed counseling, you communicate well, and all that would not have come very naturally to you. Did you feel like you had to kind of learn that, or did you pick it up? Was there like a I'm very curious about the developmental side that you describe, especially because you're a counselor. Was that something that you kind of had to do in manual mode, for lack of a better word?
Mhm. I was actually at risk of being held back at times, and when I got into school, it was this is why I think I really wasn't in school very often before this, because it was so weird being in a classroom and having structure, and like I didn't understand the flow of things. I wasn't used to having kids around me, healthy kids. And yeah, it was just a trip. I was put into the lowest reading level. Like they had like reading groups, and I was in the lowest one, and I definitely sensed that I was behind. But within a year, I was caught up or advanced. So I think I'm a fast learner. Thank you, God, because I needed it. I really, I needed to have that boost.
Yeah, praise God. And then so at some point you're put back in school. So this kind of takes us into your teenage years. So yeah, take us through that. What's your worldview like as a teenager? Were you identifying as a Christian then? Or naturally, I guess you would be super averse to that, because did you think your dad was an expression of true Christianity? And you'd had these bad experiences with the Catholic Church. Like, what was your worldview like? Maybe you can take us through that.
I was so miserable as a teenager. I like looking back on it now, I know I was dealing with like spiritual attacks or spiritual issues. I don't know, remember what the word is for that, but I was just a wreck. I did well in school, and that was like about it. I struggled with everything else. I developed an eating disorder. I literally wanted to just like crawl out of my skin. I had so much self hatred. And I think a lot of that was just because of the way that I was treated and the neglect, right? Because as kids, we we have our cup filled by others, by our parents, and our parents, even if they don't think they're Jesus, they they model that God to creation relationship, like the Heavenly Father, and we're his children. And I believe that our parents set the tone for that. So if you have abusive parents or neglectful parents, I think that's likely going to paint a different picture of what God is. And that definitely happened for me. On top of the distorted Christian themes that were going on in my life specifically, I had a lot of anger towards Christianity, towards God, even when I didn't necessarily believe in God. And yeah, I mean, I was struggling with suicidal ideation every month. Every month. It was just, and I didn't get any help for it really because it was just that theme of denial was so strong.
That makes complete sense. Like, when we were in Bible college, we would learn about like the problem of evil, right? Everyone kind of has this question: how can God be good? Why do bad things happen? And you learn a lot of like nifty answers to that, in philosophy or theology. But then when the rubber meets the road, when you meet somebody that's had like a lived experience of like having a really rough childhood, I find they often struggle, even if you give them kind of an intellectual answer experientially to know that God is good. That can take quite a while to develop. So I'm really keen to hear about how that happened in your life. Um, at one point, you do kind of become interested in, I guess, what you could call more broadly the New Age, with a course in miracles, like with the law of attraction and stuff like that. Maybe you could tell us about that. So, as a teenager, were you kind of more agnostic? What led you into being open to kind of like more New Age ideas?
Yeah, so I think it kind of started, so both my parents were raised Catholic and fell out of it and got into New Age practices in their 20s. And so this Christianity that I got brought up in really was kind of this weird New Agey Christianity world that my dad created. So I I was atheist a lot of the time. Oftentimes wanted to believe that God was real. I was in a Christian bubble growing up, but I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt like the odd one out with that. But I did really try. Like I remember like sitting down with like a teen Bible and trying to get through Genesis. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like I can't, I wanted to, but I was just like, no, this doesn't make any sense. And my mom tried her best to get us going to church, and I just hated it. I hated it because when I was with my dad, he would go on these out like 3-hour long rants. It was insane. And he would rant about his delusions and all this stuff. And to survive, I would just repeat in my head, no. Like I didn't have the courage to stand up to him as this scary person that he was, and say, you're wrong, you're delusional and all this stuff. So I would just say it to myself. And my anger had nowhere to go there, but it definitely came out at church. I did not want to be there. I would get grounded sometimes for not going. So, and especially when I would go to a Catholic church, it was like there was like this visceral aversion to being in there, like looking at the holy water and everyone's get walking in, touching it, you know, and it was like just like this anger. It was weird. Looking back on it, it was weird. I don't think it was completely coming from me. It was like next level. But yeah, my mom started to get into A Course in Miracles and Law of Attraction. I'm not sure how that transition happened, but it was when I was in high school and I was just open to it to an extent. I knew that I felt horrible and I was determined to find a way out because other people seemed okay and I was like, I'm not okay. So I started meditating, getting into mindfulness, and it wasn't until I was in college. No, it wasn't until it was like post COVID, I got into New Age. So, first, what happened was I went off to college. I had distance from my family, and that really helps put things in perspective. And I was majoring in basically psychology, and we were given the adverse childhood experiences quiz. It's a 10 question quiz that was done clinically. It was a really big study, but I won't get into it. And it's like the 10 most common traumas that people experience as children. And I took it and I scored really high. And I remember the classrooms, people were like raising their hand and sharing what their score was. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna be the person that shares my score because there's probably someone else in the room that has a score like mine and is too afraid to admit it, right? But I'll never forget my professor's reaction. It was very awkward. He didn't know how to respond to it. And he was a counselor, like he was a professional counselor. And he was just like, and so that told me a lot. I was like, oh, no, this is like the reason why I'm I don't want to exist, right? And I had like a breakdown after that because it just all kind of came together. Long story short, went into trauma research and like evidence-based trauma modalities, pretty hardcore, but there's a lot of overlap with trauma healing from a clinical perspective and from a spiritual alternative perspective. They do overlap quite a lot. And if you're not careful, if you don't know what's the danger in that, it's really easy to get sucked into it. And that's exactly what happened to me. It only took a year and a half for me to reach my bottom with that.
Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, tell us about that. That's really, really interesting. Like, so you have this experience that kind of sends you on a downward trajectory, looking into trauma. I find it so interesting that you've got like the education background to speak about this kind of stuff too, being trained as a counselor, and also you've got a spiritual worldview because a lot of counselors that I've met anyway are quite secular. So I'm really interested to hear how you work it all out. So yeah, what happens next for you? So you're in university, you get into trauma research. Take us through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So COVID kind of happened, and that was like so much time and space for me to just peel onion layers. And I was like, "Oh." I started smoking weed, which in my head, I was like, I'm not doing it like stoners. I'm not a stoner. I'm healing, right? I'm using this in a as medicine because I would smoke and then I would journal about my experiences, and it felt like I was having these shifts and I was processing things. And I started doing A Course in Miracles, and A Course in Miracles has so it's supposedly like Jesus being channeled through a woman, which we know now is demonic. Uh, but it's not just a text of channeled material, it's also daily lessons that you go through, and it's basically brainwashing. And the further I got into it, the more I started to have like weird experiences, which felt validating. It's like, oh, I'm good at this. It's working, right? And then paired with the weed, it was kind of all, you know, coming together. But I thought I was healing. So eventually I was still I'm definitely not Christian at this point. And I wasn't quite sure about all this spiritual stuff, but I ended up getting into ketamine, like clinical IV ketamine, because everything I was doing wasn't working. I was like perfect, what I thought the perfect counseling client. I was doing all the things every day to have better mental health, and it wasn't working. I was still having these horrible flashbacks, horrible social anxiety. I just couldn't. I knew that I had all these skills and these gifts, but I couldn't do anything with them. I was like totally stuck. And so I got into ketamine, and I had this moment of speaking to whatever spirit there was. I was like, look, I, if you're real and you're there, I just want to know it. Like, just show it to me. Because I was anxious about doing ketamine. I had never done a psychedelic before. And I was a scaredy cat. So I was like, please, I do not want to have a bad trip. Right? Please just show me that like spirit is real and it's good and all the things. And I got what I asked for.
Yeah, well, take me through that. I've done ketamine. but only really low doses. Like we would snort it kind of like a party drug here in Melbourne. But I've never done like IV ketamine, and from what I understand, it's a very, very different experience. So you were doing that in like a therapeutic environment, obviously, if it's being administered via IV. So you experience this spirit, you're speaking to the spirit, and I'm guessing that opens you up to the new age and to the spiritual dimension even more than like a course in miracles. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear what how that plays out.
Yeah, so basically like I just hit the ground running because this is what I was waiting for. I was waiting to know for sure that when I die, it's not just nothingness, right? And A Course in Miracles, even though I agreed with it, I didn't like it. I didn't like what their beliefs of what happened when we die and that oneness and like you cease to exist and all that. So ketamine trip was a very spiritual experience and it just blew my mind. And I dove into animism, like Native American spirituality, anything like eco-based, green witchcraft, herbalism. I even got into stupid crystals. I thought they were so dumb. But the thing is when you start doing this stuff, you do start having experiences. Like I was given these crystals for chakra work and all that type of stuff. And like the first time I got my chakras aligned or whatever, I was laying in bed that night and I felt them swirling. I wasn't on any substances. I was like having an experience and that's I think a lot of Christians are like they think new agers are dumb because it's like this is ridiculous. It's a rock, right? But they don't realize that like the danger that I don't know how they do it, but they give you experiences and you get hooked on the experiences too. Like I wanted to become enlightened and there was probably this undertone of this Jesus complex that was not healed. I always rejected the Jesus thing. It was a crippling amount of pressure to live up to. Talk about perfectionism. But I think it still I almost feel like it was a curse that was put on me. I don't know, but I mean, you name your child, you have the authority to name your child and you name her Jesus, you know. So, yeah. It it was a lot. I started having a lot of experiences and I just got deeper and deeper into it.
So these experiences kind of prove to you that the this realm was real. Two things that I constantly hear from people who are into the new age is firstly, they're often seeking healing from trauma. Like that's so common. The other one is a lot of people are really fed up with materialism, like the idea that you're just basically a brain and when you die, it's like there's nothing more. There's like nothing more to this life. There's no supernatural world. And so a lot of people they get into the occult, they get into the new age, and they find that it's like fulfilling a need in them because we're spiritual beings. Like I think we are created to want more than materialism promises us, more than atheism promises us. And then people have these very real experiences. I like what you said, like they are real experiences, but they're a counterfeit spirituality. Um, so at some point you begin to explore Christianity. So you've had these experiences with crystals. You know that the supernatural world is real. But take us through how you eventually come to even consider Christ after your dad thought he was Christ. Like um, when I was doing psychology in high school, it was really interesting to me to learn about how you can condition people and animals. And so I imagine you would have been conditioned to have a really bad reaction to Jesus and the person of Christ. So I find it so I really want to understand like how you even became open to that.
Mhm. Yes, I had so much resistance to Jesus. I mean, way more so than just like this idea of God. So, yeah, I mean, I have so much compassion for myself because like it makes sense. I'm just so relieved that I got to where I got. And basically what happened was I I basically hit a rock bottom in my life. I was trying with all of my might to heal myself. and it wasn't working. And I was trying to heal my family, and I just hit this point of surrendering. I surrendered control over this chunk of my life. I was like, I'm not going to be the one to fix this. And I just let go. And I was kind of running the show in my relationship too. I'm married now. We were together for a long time. And my boyfriend then, husband now, decided we're gonna move out of state. And I was just like, okay, you know. And within a couple months, we had a place secured. And I was like, okay, this is really happening. And my mental health actually got worse. And I remember laying in bed with this move approaching. And I just had such strong paranoia. I wasn't really a paranoid person, but like this paranoia just like really like surrounded me. And I it was like I could just feel that I was covered in this like pit of darkness, and there was this light that was approaching me. And I knew I had to walk towards this light and through this light, and I didn't know what was going to be on the other side of it. I didn't know what the light was. And it freaked me out. Like, we are afraid of the light when we're in the darkness. It's crazy to look back on. So, I had that experience, and then when I was packing up my stuff, I came across some old books, and one of them I was like, throw away, donate, whatever. And one of them was, I think it was Imagine Heaven. That's what I noted here. Um, by John Burke. And I had gotten that book years before in a desperate attempt to convince myself that heaven was real. And it kind of worked to some extent. But I stopped reading. The bookmark was left in the last chapter called The City of God. And that's where I was like, no, like, this is ridiculous. But when I picked it up this time, I was drawn to the pages, and it was like these beautiful descriptions of the city of God, like the gems and like the worshiping of God, our heavenly Father. And it was it was like it was kind of alive, and I just had like this little experience with it. It's hard to put to words, but I was just like, I'm gonna keep this. So I put that in the keep pile. And then later that night is when my my big experience happened.
I'm not going to
So
interrupt you. Take yeah, yeah. What was your big experience?
so I'll preface this by saying I was completely sober, right? Because I knew I was like looking for a job, so I wasn't even smoking weed. And I was laying in bed at night, scrolling through Instagram, which was filled with like new age nonsense, right? And there was this post that popped up called something like an update on my Jesus situation. What? And I clicked on it. I started reading the article, and it was written by someone who was in the New Age healing field. Her name's Caroline Dooner, I believe. And she just brought me through her her weird unraveling from New Age, and her New Age friends started coming to her like one by one with these like demonic attacks that they were experiencing, and she was like, what's going on? And her just like expressing her beliefs about Christianity previously, like Jesus lovers are cringy, and like this doesn't make sense. And I was just like so relating to it. But I was like, where is this going? Right. And I was just like getting pulled like sentence by sentence. And it was like things were like speeding up. My heart was like starting to beat faster. And there was this one line that just struck me. And it was Satan masquerades as love and light, but he's the master of deception. And I was like, excuse me, I was like, oh. And like that, like literally, like time stopped existing as time. And I was, my nervous system splintered into like ice, and my bones were frozen, and I was petrified because in an instant, the veil was lifted and I was surrounded by the presence of the demons that I had let into my life. Several. I didn't see them. I'm happy I didn't, because just feeling their presence was the most amount of fear I've ever felt in my life. It was like that the mountain that I lived in, where I was surrounded by witches and molesters and meth heads and all that, it like that feeling was there, but that night there was no filter. It was just like raw, sinister, evil permeating around me. And I I guess the grace of God, just I felt like a speck of dust. I felt like a tiny speck of dust floating in the universe, like so infinitesimally, if that's the word, small and helpless. What could I do against this invisible evil? So I repented. I felt the presence of Jesus almost like slightly above this scene that was unfolding, and just like his authority, like the authority of him as like a king and savior, and like the truth of Christianity. Like it was just all in an instant. All of this was just instantaneous. It was like, uh, I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was just like so happy, fearfully happy to like surrender all of it. I was like, I am so dumb. I didn't know what I was doing at all. Like, it's you, it's all you. I surrender myself. And as soon as I did that, like just as quickly as it had happened, vanished. And the room was just a room. And I was Christian. That's how it happened.
That's really incredible. So it sounds like the Spirit of God illuminated your mind to all of these kinds of things that were going on behind the scenes. So that's like what we would call in theology regeneration. Like the Spirit comes, He regenerates you, and that's really, really fascinating and incredible. But I wonder what was going through your mind afterwards, like after that happened, and you'd experienced this. You knew that Christianity was true. You the mask had kind of dropped from the world. You saw Satan for who he is. That's a really big shift for you as a person, because it means that so many things in your life have to change, and that can be a really uncomfortable time for a lot of people. Uh, it can cause a lot of cognitive dissonance because you've had all these practices and ways of doing things in the world and ways of viewing things, and now it all needs to change. How did that happen for you? How did that unfold?
So for me, I'm like, if I'm in, I'm all in. That's kind of how I am. So and the way that this unfolded, like it was like he just undid all of it. Like it was just complete. And I woke up the next morning just free, like free from the chronic, crippling anxiety that I was having, free from the darkness, free from my phobias and fears. And I felt like a newborn baby. Like I get why people say born again, because it did feel like that. It even felt like I had new eyes. Like when I went outside that next day, it was like I could see expansively. and things were brighter, literally brighter. Whereas before, it was like I was constantly looking downward, like inward, trying to heal, right? Which it was really more like whack-a-mole. Like you process this thing and something else pops up and it's just like a circus of healing. Or I was looking up towards enlightenment. So it was like that was gone. I almost felt like I couldn't go inward for a while. Um, so it was just like this freedom to just be on the horizontal plane as a human being. And I got all my new age books and I chucked them in a dumpster. I got my crystals and I chucked them into a forest, which my brother saw me doing that and he was like, "What what are you doing? What's going on?" And that was like planting the seed for him. He helped do it with me. And yeah, things just moved really quickly after that. I got a fantastic job and because I was really struggling to even work part-time. Like it was ridiculous. It was all like the spiritual warfare. So as soon as all this happened, it's like things just fell into place. Like I can't believe how awesome my life is now. Like it's crazy. And now I get to help other people. Like I'm free to do God's will. I'm free. And yeah, I said no to all these things I used to be attached to. For me, it wasn't hard. For the most part, it wasn't hard. It was like, no. And there was some things that kind of lingered, like I was a huge feminist and I hated men. I had a lot of anger towards men. And a couple weeks after this experience happened, I was like reading the Bible and I came across something that brought up that anger towards men, and I was just like, I have to give it to you. I have to give this to you, God. Like, please take this. And I literally felt this anger like leave me, like it left my torso. I don't know what it was. Could it have been remnants from a demon? I don't know. I don't really care. It was just freedom. Another another yeah, moment of freedom. So, yeah.
That's really fascinating. I'm really interested to hear your perspective on that too, because often during evangelism, this kind of comes up with people in Melbourne. I mean, like feminism is pretty big in Melbourne. People are very progressive. It's quite like a liberal city. And sometimes when I'm speaking to them, I feel like we're having a conversation based on bad experiences they've had with men, more so than like an objective discussion about the merits of like different worldviews and things like that. Um, and I'm not trying to say that they're being irrational or anything like that, because it's completely normal that your worldview is based a lot on your own experiences. That's just completely natural. Everyone does that. But do you think that's a common thing? Like people that are some women we find are really hostile to the Bible because of certain verses that might be there. And I know people have different interpretive frameworks to understand those verses. But for you, do you think that sort of internal gut reaction was because you'd had such bad experiences with men? Like like if your father figure is a good example. Um, yeah, was it difficult for you to see God as a father, and like how did all that unfold? Like did has your views on the relationship between men and women in feminism changed at all since becoming a Christian? Would you be happy to walk us through that? I know I didn't have that as a question, but I'm just genuinely very curious.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually something I feel, kind of passionate about because again, it was like, um, the 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 extremes that I had flip-flopped, right? And I feel like our when you're not a Christian, like the fears that I had and the anger that I had were the things that Satan was trying to keep me from. Like I was pro-abortion. I thought it was selfish to have kids at all. I didn't care how great of a parent you were because it's like, well, you can't guarantee that your child isn't going to get like kidnapped and tortured and like just crazy stuff, right? Because I was so miserable. So, um and yeah, I didn't want to get married. I had I had a good relationship with my boyfriend, and he was like my best friend, but I was like, I almost didn't even want to recognize that he was a man. Like I was like, like, no, you're not really like. So God healed those wounds too. Not all of my story was like instantaneous healing, but a lot of it was. And the more I learned about like the theology of the body and God's design for a man, design for a woman, and like being equal in dignity, but just different. That was so freeing. I was so uncomfortable with my body. I was so uncomfortable with being a woman. I definitely had body dysphoria, almost gender dysphoria. Like I was not trans. I knew that I was a woman. But I was like, I wish I was a man. Like I just did not want anything. It all wrapped together, like the fear of pregnancy and um, I just really hated sexism. But the more I leaned into it, the more free I felt, the better um, our relationship got. Like we got married and just kind of stepping back a little bit and not uh feeling like I need to make all the decisions and like I need to be in control and all that. It was like it just feels so good to trust God's design in that way. And it's not there's a lot of sexist Christians and I'll put that out there, and that's frustrating because it's really not doing anyone any favors of like coming to the church. But when it's done well, it's beautiful.
I completely agree.
Which
Yeah,
yeah,
completely
my
agree.
husband's amazing. So I'm like, yeah, it's awesome.
That's good. That's good. Praise God for that. I think it's really good to hear a woman's perspective on these kind of things because I understand when I speak to women, like, if abortion comes up, that's a really common one. Every now and then a woman will experience have an abortion, and she says it as part of her testimony on this channel. And I just like to let them speak because I realize that in the feminist framework, like straight white men, which is what I am, are like the enemy. So it's always interesting to let women share their perspectives on these things because I think you often hear one side of it on the culture. Secular people think every woman's pro-abortion, every woman has a good experience with abortion, every woman um, feels a certain way about gender roles. But the reality is, there's a lot of diversity within women's experiences and thoughts, and so I love to hear that on the podcast. And I'm really grateful that you shared that. We're coming up on about an hour now, so this kind of leads me to my last question. Um, We've talked a bit about the changes you've experienced since becoming a Christian. Um, One thing I do want to get actually before we come to that last question is what advice would you give to someone who's in a similar position to you? So if somebody's traumatized, maybe they're considering Christianity, but they've had some bad experiences, um, and they've got this part of them that just thinks like, surely not Christianity. That can't be the way. Yeah, what would you say to somebody that's been in that position?
I would say pay attention to what you resist because there's something there, right? If it's neutral, you won't pick up on it, right? But pay attention to those resistances, and whatever you have, just give it to God, even if it's small, right? Like I don't believe in you, God, but I want to. So please help me get there. Right? Whatever you might only have one step in front of you that you're able to see, take it. Just take that one step, right? It's just that humility, humble yourself, um, and yeah, just do what you can. I also I still really love somatic work, like body-based, like mind-body connection. I think God, he gave us our bodies. He gave us like it's just so that connection's so intelligent, and our imagination, our ability to use that with God is super cool. Like imaginative prayer is like a type of prayer that you can use. So I've imagined like holding holding my problems in my hands and literally giving it to Jesus and his heart just absorbing them, you know? Um, yeah, and then also I want to mention like seeking out healing in a balanced way because I lived in a hyper spiritual, completely ungrounded family. And God gave us the ability to reason, to be rational. There's a balance, right? So don't get stuck in the spiritual sphere if that's your thing. And I do think a lot of women get lost in there. A lot of new agers are women. Um, but God gave us brain. We're physical beings. So yeah, lean into body, mind, and soul and balance that out. Yeah.
Yeah, very well said. Uh, one thing I've been struck by throughout your whole story is you're very, very rational. Like even as a child, you couldn't fully deal with what was going on, but you said in your mind, no, no. And I think you've got an incredible character by the grace of God, because I can't imagine how I would have gone through that as a child. And so I love seeing it come full circle. I love that your story has so much hope and purpose for people who are in a dark place, because sometimes you hear in psychology, if someone's had a rough childhood, man, it's so hard for them to overcome, and you have overcome, and you've got a healthy life by the grace of God. Um, you were telling me before we started recording, you've just had your child, you're doing well, the baby's doing well, and I'm so thrilled for you. It's so beautiful to see how God has redeemed that whole situation. Um, one thing I am curious about now is like, uh have you made any connections with your parents or your siblings, like, or have you had to kind of move on to protect yourself and your new family? Are you comfortable talking about that? I didn't even have that as a question, but I'm curious about how that's resolved for you now.
Yeah, it's so I physically have distance, right? I'm states away, and my brothers have been changed because of my experience. Theirs wasn't an instantaneous process, but it's been unfolding, and I'm really happy for them and the progress they've made with that. And especially because I they had it a lot worse than I did in a lot of ways. Um, but yeah, family's messy. Family's very messy. So um, kind of learning how to like what's the true meaning of forgiveness and what does that mean in a practical sense? And um yeah, I don't know, just like kind of figuring out as I go. But it there's been a lot of healing experiences with it too, you know. My mom, she came back. She didn't leave New Age right away. It was about a year after my experience because she was happy that I found Jesus, but she was still thinking it was like a New Age Jesus. And um, we had a conversation guided by the Holy Spirit, and that's when she had an instantaneous experience similar to mine. So she dropped everything and she came back to the Catholic Church after 40 years of rejecting it, and she's doing great. So it's just been, yeah, it's been amazing. I don't know if
That's
that
awesome.
answered your question, but
It does. It does. It sounds like it's an unfolding story, like a lot of people's lives are, but it sounds like there's some really encouraging signs there. So I'm so glad to hear that. And speaking about your life now, people might want to keep up with it. Can you tell us a little bit about your website? I'm going to link that in the description box below so people can find that really easily. And I'm also going to provide your email address. I'm assuming you're like open to maybe scheduling podcasts with other people if people want to reach out to you. Um,
yeah.
so tell us about that. Tell us about your website, where you're up to now.
So I'm working as a counselor and a coach. So I'm leaning back into somatic work, body-based nervous system therapy from a Christian perspective, and I'm really excited about it. Um, and I'm kind of discerning where I want to go with that, where God wants me to be. So if there's any women listening that are pregnant or hoping to have a baby soon or recently had a baby, I would love to do a brief interview about your experience, how you're wanting to prepare, what you're wanting out of birth. Um, like you mentioned, I just had a baby 5 months ago, and I had horrible phobia of childbirth. So for God to bless me um with like a healthy pregnancy, and I had a fear-free birth. I had a natural fear-free birth, and it was actually relatively pain-free, which is crazy because I'm a wimp. But I had a really incredible experience, and I think it for me it was that combination of nervous system preparation because it's a big event, um, and this spiritual journey that I walked with Jesus throughout pregnancy. So I would love to work with women in that way, and hear what any of your listeners have to say about that. So
Awesome. So, guys, please feel free to get in touch with Noelle. I'll provide her email address in the description box below and the website. So, go check all of that out. And hey, guys, if you found value in today's guest's testimony, if you want to help get Noelle's testimony out to far more people, if you like, subscribe, comment, all the boring stuff YouTubers always ask you to do, it does genuinely make a difference. It's a free way to support the channel and it helps get her story out to far, far more people. If you're willing to do that, I would really appreciate it. So, thank you everyone for listening. Noelle, I think we'll end it there. But thank you so much for your time, sister. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We can speak a little more once I end the recording. But I'm really grateful. Thank you.